It is not at all Christian. In fact, it's a pagan custom, and because it happens in the spring and Easter is in the spring, the two just kind of ended up being celebrated very close to the same time. So the fellows sprinkle water on the girls, and some of the other fellows will have little willow branches that they tie colorful ribbons on, and they gently whip the girls with those ribbons. And the girls will kind of egg the guys on by having little pieces of ribbon of one color or another, and after he whips her, she will give him one of those ribbons to tie on to his whip, and then he goes off and he does the same thing to some other girl. Well, recently the girls in Slovakia have decided that they needed to have a turn at this, and so now the Tuesday after Easter, the girls turn around and they sprinkle water on the guys. And so that now is being done both ways. The bell ringer is here because we wanted to have a display that included the three-bar cross. In the eastern part of Slovakia, there are quite a number of Orthodox churches and also Byzantine Catholic churches. And you will see churches that will have three-bar crosses that where all three bars are horizontal. And you'll see other churches that will have two horizontal bars at the top and one that is at an angle at the bottom. And we thought that was an important part of the history and the culture of the country, and that needed to be included as well. It's on this kind of structure because, for example, on the very old churches, they are wooden churches. Some of them are 400 or more years old. And those structures were not able to support the weight of a large bell on the top of the building. So they would have a little tower that would sit right beside the church and the bell up on the top of that. And so we have a fellow in here who's ringing the bell saying it's time for people to come to church. And so that's why this one is here. Now we need to point out this lady in the house here. You have to get down low to see her, but you can see that she's leaning out the window and she has her finger there and she's shaking at it because we have a dog and a cat here that are in quite a spat, and she's just tired of all that noise and barking and so on. So Mama is there saying, stop all that noise and stop fighting with each other. So that's real life. You know, that happens all over the world.
I was going to say, well, maybe that was one custom our cats and dogs got from Slovakia.
Could be. That's right. Could very well be. Well, let's move this way into another part of this display. And we'll start up here where we see a working sawmill. There is about 40% of Slovakia which is forested. And so lumbering has historically been a major industry in Slovakia and continues to be. And there's a lot of forestry work over here in this part of the country, and so we decided to situate that in here. And so we see these two men that are rolling a log up into the sawmill, and here we see the sawmill has three blades that are going up and down, powered by the water wheel, and that's cutting the log. And notice also, here's a little boy that's sitting by the sawmill, and he's been fishing, and lo and behold, he has caught a little fish. So they do that there just like they do it here.
Let's talk about craftsmanship for a minute, because what I noticed about this is the way that this log falls back down, and they try to put it back up again. And I mean, again, just the physics lesson that's involved with that is amazing.
Right. Yes. All of what you see here is using very simple, basic physics principles with a lot of ingenuity added to it. And what's happening here is that you can't see it, but at the upper end of that there's a piece of nylon fish line into the end of the log and goes through that wall, and that keeps the log from sliding down. Also, from that log there's a nylon fish line that is attached to the bottom part of each of those poles that those men are using. So when they lower that pole, it actually rolls the log back again, so it's ready for them to push it up. And you see that's a very stubborn log. These fellows have kept trying and trying to get that log to roll down where the other ones are supposed to be, and they haven't yet succeeded, but they're going to keep at it.
In the United States, we would turn around and have 15 engineers on this to design this, but three men decided how to do all this.
That's right. They just figured out how to do it. Very ingenious. And one of the men who did the wood carving on this, I asked him about what part of this was the most difficult for him to carve. And he said one of the difficult things for him was carving these moving figures, because while he was a very accomplished carver, he had never made figures that were going to move. And he said some of these figures he had to carve 2 and 3 times to get the body parts to be shaped just right so they could then be assembled with the pins where they needed to be so that the arms would move or the heads would turn or whatever in a very lifelike fashion. Let's move down here now, and we see 2 men on a crosscut saw that are busy working away cutting this big log. And of course that's something that has been done in this country for many, many years, but we can see that sort of thing being done in Slovakia as well. And there's sawdust on the ground there from where they've been busy cutting this log. And next to them is a man who is a wheelwright. He's busy making parts for a wagon, and we can see part of the wagon assembly here in the foreground, some wheels that are hanging on the wall, and he's working away there making another part for that wagon. And then down in the foreground we have some scenes, animated scenes here. And I wanted to have animation down in the front because so many families bring small children in here. We have a woman with a churn who's making butter, and this little boy is having a rollicking time on this rocking horse. It almost looks like it's a bucking bronco, and he's really hanging on there. And then we have a water well here out in the barnyard, and this fellow is stopping to take a drink of water that's from that well. And this chicken is looking at him saying, gee, why don't you give me a drink as well? So that's kind of a barnyard scene here, which is just a typical scene in rural Slovakia. Now, let's move back here, and we see, excuse me, there's some people loading hay on the wagon in the back, with the horse standing there waiting to haul that load away. And down in front of them we see a man with a scythe who's cutting the hay, and behind him is a woman working right alongside him out in the field, and she's raking up the hay. And notice behind that there's a couple of the haystacks. It's really interesting as we travel around Slovakia. We see many, many places where they have the hay drying in those frames or wooden frames, and look around and we see different shaped frames used in different parts of the country, but they're all hanging hay on them and drying them, and after the hay is dried, then it's loaded on the farm wagon that you see up above there. And notice too that down here there's a woman who's taking her lunch. She has a blanket spread out with a loaf of bread and a pitcher with milk in it, and she right now is taking a drink out of a jug as part of her lunch. And then moving forward, we see here's 3 other women that are working in a potato field. The 2 ladies with the hose are out there digging the potatoes, and we can see behind them some sacks of potatoes that are completely filled, and they're putting potatoes in these little baskets, and then eventually we'll put them in the bag that's down here in the front. I want to make sure that the viewers see this little display with the woman on her knees rocking a baby in a cradle under a building that looks like an Indian teepee. Many people comment about that, and it's interesting to me that we see structures like that so far removed from something that we thought happened only here in the United States. But that's what they use when they have their babies out there, and these women will take turns. They'll take care of the baby for a while, and then they'll go and hoe the potatoes for a while. Let's turn our attention now to the manger scene, which is the focal point of this entire display. And the man who designed this, when he started doing one like this that is in Slovakia, his intention at that point was only to carve a manger scene. He had no thought of doing any animation. But friends of his saw that he had made this beautiful, very large manger scene and said, Joseph, why don't you figure out how to get some moving figures, some people who could come and pay their respects to baby Jesus? And with the help of his son, who's an engineer, he figured out how to do that in a very ingenious way. Again, a very simple principle that causes these figures to turn 90 degrees as they come toward baby Jesus and pay their respects to him. And I want to make sure that everybody sees an unusual figure that's in this display. There's a little boy there on his hands and knees offering a toy to baby Jesus. And the man who designed this, his name is Mr. Joseph Pekara. He explained that he put that little boy in there because when he was a boy that age, his most precious possession was a wooden horse on wheels, just like the one this little boy has. And he put this boy in there on his hands and knees, offering his most precious possession to baby Jesus as a tribute to his Lord.
So he put himself in the carving.
That's right. And I asked him before that, I said, I don't see a signature anywhere on this. And he said, oh, it's there. And then he proceeded to tell me about this little boy being there, and that's why he took the liberty of adding that to the scene. And we see the angel up here at the top of the manger scene. Again, just a very beautiful piece of carving.
If you look very closely, he even put Gloria in excelsis Deo.
That's right. That's right. And so that makes that stand out, and the significance of it's there. And so this is very definitely the focal point of the entire display. Now, as we look just to behind the manger scene, we see a flock of sheep. And this is probably the scene that more people comment about than any other, because it looks so lifelike. And we can see next to the sheep there's a shepherd who's sitting on a stump, and he's playing a flute. And behind him is his watchdog, or his shepherd dog, who is helping him keep these sheep together. And so they're herding the sheep and letting them pasture out there in the field. But we need to also pay attention to the display right behind it, because there's the shepherd's hut. And you see he has logs cut and so on for his fire. And we see some animals that are moving along in front of there. And we're also going to see here in just a minute a very large bear. And notice what the bear has in his front paws. He has stolen one of the sheep from this flock. And he's being chased by a big dog, followed by a man with an axe. And then he's followed up by a little boy with a stick who's going to finish that bear off. Now, let's move over here into these little workshops. Down here in the front, we see 6 men. There are 2 carpenters, 2 barrel makers, and 2 shoemakers. And these are crafts that have been done for many, many years in Slovakia, and so that's why these are here. We see 2 carpenters. One man is using a chisel and a mallet, and he's carving a large statue of some sort. The other man is working with a hand plane, has a piece of wood clamped in a vise, and he's planing that and making a beautiful piece as well. 2 men are making barrels, which they have done for many years. And next to them, we see 2 shoemakers, because they have made shoes for many, many years in Slovakia. During the communist era, many of those shoes were exported to other parts of what was then the former Soviet Union. Moving up from there, we see a group of musicians. And I was curious why these musicians were holding their violins down on their chest instead of the usual way up under their chin. And Mr. Pekara, who designed this, explained that these musicians also sing. And you can't sing very well when you have the violin under your chin. And so there's a village by the name of Turkova in central Slovakia, which is credited with having the purest form of Slovak music. And they are the ones who instituted this practice of holding the violins down on their chest instead of up under their chin, and that's why he included them in there. And we see there's a man playing a violin, and we've got a lady here with their hands on her hips is dancing. And off to the side, there's 4 other dancers. And the men are holding axes that are called Janášek axes, and they're named after a man who was the Robin Hood of Slovakia. He robbed from the rich people and gave to the poor, and he used a big axe like that. So some of the dancers will hold axes like that as a tribute to Janášek. He was born in that same village. Moving up from there, we see an unusual structure that's a replica of a wooden church in Slovakia. That church is called Svätý Kríž, which translates to Holy Cross. It's one of the few Protestant wooden churches that remain in Slovakia. I think there's only maybe 4 of those that remain out of the 30 or so wooden churches that are in Slovakia. The other thing that's significant about this, a couple things in fact. It's the largest wooden church that exists in Slovakia today, and we're told that you can get as many as 6,000 people inside that wooden church, every bit of it built from wood. But the other interesting fact is that this church had to be moved from its original location. The place where it was originally was near a river that was decided they were going to dam up, and this building would have been lost. It would ended up being where the lake is now. So it was torn down piece by piece, and moved to higher ground. And so now it's safe and can be used. And you see a picture here of many people that are processing into that church.